Assalamualaikum and hi, my name is Amirah Binti Hafsam with a metric number of 1918206 along with my group mate Nurul Nadhirah Binti Abd Fatah with a metric number of 1911276. We are from group 4 and we'll be presenting the book titled Human Rights in Islam by Syed Abul Maududi. So firstly, we'll look into the background of Syed Abul Maududi himself and also the background of the book. Alright, so Syed Abul Maududi was actually born in 1903 in India, and he is actually a journalist and also a fundamentalist of Muslim theologian in Pakistani. He received Islamic education from young. However, he has to stop for a while due to some family issues, but the passion didn't stop until he actually established Jamaat al-Islami, which helped to reform Pakistani from the influence of secularism. Alright, so now we move on to the background of the book. So the book was actually translated and edited by the principal of Al-Kenami College of Islamic Technology. So this book was actually based on two talks. One, the earlier talks of Maulana Maududi on the political system in Islam, and also the talk at the invitation of Civic Rights and Liberties Forum in 1975. So in this specific video, we'll mention of two main issues in the book and also two details of the issue itself. So firstly, we'll be looking at the Islamic political framework and also the Islamic approach versus Western approach in human rights, and also the further details in human rights in Islam and compare it with the UN. Alright, first let's take a look on how just and holistic it is, this Islamic political framework. Alright, so generally, Islamic political framework was actually based on three principles. First, the Tawheed, second, the Risalah, and third, the Khilafah. So, Tawheed is referring to that this whole framework was actually to manifest that Allah is the only creator, the sustainer, and also the master of the universe. And secondly, Risalah was to say that all of this framework was actually referred to the revelation, the Al-Quran and the Hadith. And thirdly, Khilafah means that to promote or to let people aware that man actually has its responsibility and purpose in this world. Alright, so this Islamic political framework can actually be exercised through Islamic democracy. Why? Because Islamic democracy have this principle of shared responsibility and also thorough discussion. So this shared responsibility is talking about the responsibility of the politician and the people. So in Islamic democracy, this responsibility is shared. So they have to work as a community to build a nation instead of the sense of individualistic, like politicians can do this, and then people don't have to care about what the politicians is doing. We're gonna do whatever we're gonna do, which can be seen now in the Western democracy. And also, thorough discussion was actually referred to the participation of the people themselves, where in Islam it is encouraged to have mushawarah, which is to know the voice of the people, to be included in any issue or decision making in the country. And all of this, the whole system should be based on Sharia and only exercised for the purpose of peace and welfare of the people. Alright, so now we will look onto like how is it this Islamic approach in human rights is different from the Westerns. Alright, so for the Western approach in human rights, of course, Western being the Western, they are the founder of everything. So when they created the UN and all those principles, they actually wanted to let other countries or other people, other group of people to know that they are the one who found them. So they wanted to act like superior, have like all this power and knowledge. So yeah, they act like they are the founder and disregard any other ideology. And then this they developed UN for their image that they know the human rights, but actually these organizations are only work to their own interests, like the case of Palestinians and the Israelis. So for me, this whole thing began when the UN separate or give half of the Palestine to the Israelis. I think that is the beginning of all. Why would you give half of someone's country to other people who just came in that country? Even though it is agreed with the Palestinian, I still think that the Western countries actually have no rights in to separate or give half of the Palestinians to the Israelis. And as for the Islamic approach, it's actually strictly referring to the primary sources, which is the Revelation, the Quran and Hadith. So we refer to the Word of God, so that there is no room for human interference, because only God can have a say on something, and we only refer to that. And even if there is manipulations or corruptions, everyone can know about it. The people can know about it, because we refer to the same primary sources. So that's why the Islamic approach is different from the Western approach in human rights. So yeah, that is all from me. I'll pass the mic to my groupmates, Nadhirah.
I am Nurul Nadhirah, and now I'll be presenting the third section of the presentation, which is human rights in Islam. So, Islamic approach on human rights is actually really comprehensive, because it encompasses the views towards the human rights from the smallest aspects, for example, the right to be acknowledged in a group of friends, to the biggest ones. For instance, a citizen's right to protest against the government who abuse their power, with the proper ways to exercise them. So there are three classifications of human rights in Islam. Number 1, basic human rights. Number 2, rights of citizens in an Islamic state. And number 3, rights of enemies at war. So now let us look at the first one, basic human rights. So basic human rights can be defined as the very basic rights of a person, no matter who he or she is, or what country does he or she come from, or perhaps what faith does he or she believes in. These rights are laid down to them because they are human beings, and that's it. So now let us look at the examples of the rights. Number 1, the right to life. Every human life needs to be protected and respected. It means that whoever violates it, regardless of the skin color, nationality, or religion, needs proper judgment, and suitable punishments should be given. Number 2, the right to safety of life. Everyone has the privilege to be saved from death or any sorts of harm. What does it mean? So let's look at the examples. For example, if a Muslim sees a person dying of starvation, then it is his responsibility to help him, to save him from dying by giving him some food. And another example would be if a person is wounded or has any illness, the Muslim that sees him, should save him by giving him the proper treatment. Next, chastity of women. The chastity of women needs to be respected at all times, under any circumstances, even during wars. Even when the women come from conquered cities during wars, it still means that the Muslims need to respect them, need to respect their chastity. Islam takes this right very seriously, that heavy punishments await those who violate it, either in this world or in the hereafter. And lastly, equality of human beings. Every human being in this world is equal, and no one has the superiority over others. The only thing that set them apart are their obedience to God, their characteristics, and their morals. The second category is the rights of citizens in an Islamic state. Citizens here refer to Muslims and non-Muslims of the Islamic state. Let us look at the first example, freedom of expression, including thoughts. This right is granted only for propagation of truth and virtue. It means that any expression that doesn't promote these two is not accepted in Islam. like the use of offensive language in the name of criticism. When Muslims see this kind of act, it is their obligation to stop the doer from repeating the action. One way of doing it is by openly condemning such behavior and showcase the righteousness promoted in Islam in their behavior. Then, number 2, security of personal freedom. Every person has the right to be free, and hence he or she can only be imprisoned when he or she has been found guilty in an open court according to the Islamic law. A person cannot be arrested only due to the basis of suspicion and no proper court proceeding that he or she is stripped away from the opportunity to defend against those charges. Open court condition is essential to ensure that the accused is not being victimized by the government. If it is due to the suspicion that the person has committed a crime or would be in the near future, the government should provide reasonings for their suspicion in the court, and the accused should produce he or her defense as usual. And when the suspicion is deemed as reasonable, then he has the right to know the period he or she will undergo in preventive detention. Number 3, freedom of conscience and conviction. Inviting other people to convert to Islam is highly recommended, but not with violence or force. This happens as converting in Islam is one's own free choice, and if he chooses to convert, then Muslims shall acknowledge the new convert as a part of the community and be given equal rights and privilege like other Muslims. For example, his or her right to be the recipient of zakah if the requirements are met. However, if the person refuses to convert, then his decision will be respected. And lastly, rulers not above the law, or the obligation of rulers to obey the laws. They cannot modify the laws for their own benefits, even if it is meant to save their own family members from being convicted. If they are found to not fulfill their obligations, then a citizen can file a legal complaint towards them. And the third category, rights of enemies at war. There are 2 types of reference of the word enemies. Number 1, non-combatants, referring to women, children, elderly people, and monks, and the combatants, referring to soldiers and war prisoners. As for the rights of non-combatants, Muslims are prohibited from killing them during or even after the war. Meanwhile, there are different sets of human rights provided for the combatants. As you can see on the slides, these are all the examples of the rights provided for them. Number 1, wounded soldiers should not be attacked, whether they can fight or they are not fit for fighting. Number 2, sanctity of a dead body. Muslims are prohibited from mutilating the corpses of their enemies, for example, by cutting their ears and their thumbs. And lastly, prohibition from taking anything without paying in the combatants' countries. It means that Muslims need to perform proper transaction before owning the things that belong to the people there. This can be done by either purchasing them or asking for the owner's permission. Now, let's move on to the 4th section of the presentation, comparison of Islamic approach on human rights with the United Nations, known as UDHR. What is UDHR? UDHR is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It serves as a guideline from everyone for any nation to protect human rights. It was proclaimed on 10 December 1948 by the United Nations General Assembly in Paris. Altogether, there are 30 articles, and one significant outcome from the UDHR is it has been adopted by more than 70 human rights treaties in the world. So, what are the similarities between these two? Number 1, the UDHR corresponds with the laws in Islam. Number 2, they share the same basic core, which is equality and justice to all people. And number 3, they utilize democracy and discussion between the United Nations Society Council to come up with resolutions for the issue at hand. Now, let us look at the differences between UDHR and the ones provided in Sharia. First of all, in UDHR, there are no legal consequences to whomever violate them apart from reminding, consulting, and advising. The purpose of UDHR is, after all, a common standard of achievement for all peoples and all nations, and not a treaty that is backed up with any legal obligation. This would result in the members not seeing the importance of obeying them and easily violating them. And as it only results in political impact towards its members, powerful states would not feel any remorse when disobeying them. Let's look at this example. China, a powerful country, does not face any consequences despite its infamous human rights violation of abusing and torturing Uyghur Muslims at the concentration camps. In comparison, those who violate the Sharia law are subjected to punishments either in this world or in the hereafter. As you can see, the Quranic verse on the slide shows a few of the punishments for those usurping the rights and properties of orphans in the hereafter. Besides, UDHR is only effective toward the states that ratify the declarations and those who are not on the rejecting side. Hence, by not approving it, the state is able to avoid the obligations. Meanwhile, all Muslims, despite the background differences, are obliged to obey the Sharia laws. Secondly, human rights in UDHR are too general. As a result, there might be people who take advantage of it to get away from his or her crimes. The articles also do not consider the cultural and background differences of one country to the other country. This might cause contradictions between one's belief and the declaration. For an instance, the case of Nur Sajjad, a Malaysian transgender who is protected by UN from his crimes of repeatedly insulting Islam and being charged in the Sharia court here in Malaysia. In comparison, Islam takes every factor into consideration and has provided detailed guidelines for its believers. For an instance, different punishment would be exercised according to the types of murder committed by the criminal, according to Hudud law. And now, we have reached the last part of the presentation, the conclusion. Human rights in Islam is based on morals that are universal and holistic. Thus, its main purpose is to govern the welfare and the rights of the people. Number 2, after comparing both Western and Islamic approach on human rights, it can be said that both approaches are different, as Western serves for an individual's personal gain, and Islamic is for outwardly pleasure by being an obedient servant for him. Number 3, we have also seen that UDHR, or the Framework of Human Rights by United Nations, have similarities with Islamic human rights, with two notable differences in terms of generality and towards whom does the respective side's human rights would be effective. And lastly, even though Islam has provided an extensive guideline on human rights, at the end of the day, it is a matter of one's free will, or it depends on the individual himself or herself to exercise the guideline or no. If the person decides to act on it, then he is promised countless rewards by Allah, as illustrated in the Al-Quran or Hadith. And on the contrary, if he chooses to violate it, then he shall be ready for the consequences, as again clearly stated in the Al-Quran or Hadith. And to be perfectly clear, such act is the individual's own decision, and in no way does it reflect the teachings of Islam. With that, we end our presentation. Thank you so much, and Assalamu alaikum.